Hey everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day and a wonderful week. It's time for this week's ABCs of Real Estate. This week we're on C, which is for closing costs. So today I'm going to briefly touch on what closing costs are for both the buyer and seller in a real estate transaction. Many of the first-time homebuyers I work with aren't aware of closing costs, so I like to be upfront with them and let them know what to expect. I will touch briefly on what the sellers should expect first, and then go into more detail since I mainly work with buyers. So on a seller's side of a real estate transaction, the largest chunk of closing costs is the real estate commission. So you may not know this, but the seller is the one who pays the real estate commission for both the listing agent for their home as well as the agent that brings the buyer to their home. So as a home buyer, you are not paying any real estate commission or fees to the real estate agent to pay for their commission, generally. So again, the seller pays that commission as part of their closing costs, along with proration of taxes, title insurance for the buyer, and HOA fees, estoppel and proration of HOA fees, along with some other miscellaneous fees. This generally adds up to about 8% of the purchase price, which is netted from their proceeds. So that's a seller's closing costs. A buyer's closing costs are a little bit different. And again, I like to be upfront with this because a lot of home buyers, first-time home buyers especially, aren't aware of closing costs or how much they could possibly be. Many people have their down payment and don't realize they need to bring more cash to the closing table than that down payment to their lender. So what are some of the closing costs that a buyer pays? A lot of the closing costs that they pay are to their lender. So origination fees, application fee, processing fee, as well as to the title company that's doing the closing, their processing fee, their recording fee. So that's a big portion of closing costs. The other part of it would be the appraisal, as well as proration of taxes and escrows. Escrows are money put in the lender's account for your taxes, your homeowner's insurance, sometimes HOA fees. It's paid in advance. Depending on the lender, sometimes they'll ask for a year in advance, sometimes it'll be less time. They want that upfront so that they can pay it on your behalf. Again, these are all included in your closing costs. So when your lender gives you a closing disclosure, which they will provide to the buyer prior to closing, it will outline all of these fees and how much it totals, and they'll give you a cash to close number. That cash to close number generally includes the closing costs and your down payment. This would then be due to the lender and usually is sent in the form of a wire transfer. So that's what closing costs are for the buyer. Generally, they amount to 3 to 5% of the purchase price of the home. So depending on where that home price falls, as well as some of the fees that vary from lender to lender, it's usually around 3 to 5%. So there are some tips and tricks for buyers that can lower the amount of closing costs they pay or even allow them to not pay any closing costs at all. The biggest thing is to negotiate the closing costs in with the sale of the home. So once you've decided that you want to purchase a home and we negotiate the purchase price and the contract, we can request that a certain percentage of closing costs be paid, if not all of them. So usually I suggest if we're going up against other offers to avoid requesting closing costs, but if it's money that a buyer doesn't have, then I definitely will try my hardest to negotiate on behalf of the buyer to get the seller to pay those closing costs. The best way to get that offer accepted is to offer asking price or higher, so that those closing costs can be covered. Again, keep in mind the seller has closing costs of their own, so asking them to pay additional fees on top of that can sometimes weaken an offer. Other things that can happen is lenders can obviously adjust some of their fees. They can be negotiated, Or a lender can build in a higher interest rate to pay closing costs and give a credit back to that buyer at closing. Sometimes that works out to cost the buyer more money in the end. But again, if you don't have that money up front and that's your only option, then that's something you can certainly look into. So that's a rundown of what closing costs are and what to expect. Again, if you have any questions about real estate or buying a home, selling a home, please feel free. Send me a Facebook message, a text message, an email. I'm happy to help. Thank you guys, and we'll see you again next week.